Welcome to the webinar, Top Trends in Leadership Development. We're here to talk about the best practices impacting program design that get results. So let's jump in. A little bit about our firm. We're FlashPoint Leadership Consulting, a global leadership development and training company with offices in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Sonoma, California. We deliver creative and measurable solutions that make leaders, teams, and organizations more effective, and our main practice areas are leadership development, team effectiveness, and coaching. And here's us. I'm Lauren Hartzell. I lead our marketing and brand team here at FlashPoint, and I've spent about the last 10 years or so learning about and communicating about leadership development programs. And I'm joined today by Krista Skidmore, partner and co-founder here at FlashPoint. Hey, Krista.
Hello.
Hello. So you advise and consult our clients on their leadership development efforts to ensure their programs get optimal results. And this webinar today is actually our third in a yearly series that we've done that overview top trends in leadership. And what made you want to focus in on program design as our focus this year?
Yeah, you know, Lauren, as you mentioned, we've done at a high level leadership trends for a number of years, but it's really, program design is one of the #1 questions that clients are asking us about, especially right now because, you know, a lot of our program managers are really planning for 2019 and beyond, and they're asking questions like, what should our leadership programs include? What works best? And so on. So that's a lot of the questions that we want to try to tackle today.
That sounds good. I'm looking forward to it. So let's get right to it. Let's take a look first at our learning objectives today. So today we're going to share trends influencing how L&D practitioners are designing and delivering leadership programs in categories such as measurement, reinforcement, personalization, and more. And then we're going to dive deep into the best practices in leadership program design and share a few case examples so our folks online can visualize how to put these trends into practice. So I'm going to turn it right over to you, Krista.
Great. Well, we welcome everyone, and we wanted to first start with helping you understand a little bit about the case for program design innovation and why we should be focused again on this topic. And so first, you know, knowing that both demographic shifts within our workforce as well as many technologies that we want to incorporate and so on are more thoroughly kind of putting pressure on our existing leadership program design over the last decade. Our trends research has included a call for change for several years. Fast forwarding to today, we really feel that this call for change has reached more of a critical stage. So according to a lot of the research and data that we'll talk about in our trends, little progress really has been made about the perception of our leadership programs. And in fact, that perception continues to decline. So to speak into this a little bit more about how real and sort of palpable a business imperative really innovating our programs is, we wanted to show you the 2018 State of Leadership Development report that shows some of these gaps. And this study was conducted in both 2016 and 2018 from Harvard Business Publishing. And in their 2016 report, we saw this same statistic, which was 75% of business leaders said they believed greater innovation was needed in learning techniques used in development programs. And then in the 2018 report, you can see here that that's increased to 80% of all business leaders saying that greater innovation was needed in learning techniques in their leadership programs. So there's a bit of a silver lining here that we wanted to point out in this data point. And looking at it from another point of view, you could also see this as a real clear showing of support from the business for us to really innovate our leadership programs. So when you do go to make significant changes or adaptations to what you're doing, there should be a fairly warm reception from the business, which again, we really see as kind of the silver lining. Now, innovating our programs is a complicated topic, and we know L&D practitioners that we work with, you know, they feel that pressure because they're charged with developing leaders who can not only quickly drive change, but also it's about getting that alignment among their employee direct report teams behind corporate strategy that is dynamic and changing and in a complex environment. And so the leadership program managers that we work with really feel that mounting pressure and are struggling in many ways with making some of those desired changes, especially when many of those changes actually are less standardized and require more personalization, programs that really take more time and energy to implement in many ways. So we also wanted to talk a little bit about, well, if there is insufficient innovation from the business's perspective, kind of what's getting in the way from L&D's perspective, and there's some daunting obstacles here. This 2018 survey on the state of leadership development notes that 32% of L&D practitioners noted that too much organizational change was a real barrier to the success of leadership programs. Second only, to time constraints. And so in organizations, many of you I know must be facing extensive change, whether that's reorgs, whether that's mergers, acquisitions, overhauling your operating model, really looking at regulatory changes that are happening in many organizations. The risk of paralysis around innovating our programs really increases. So, that kind of leaves us with this question of what can we do about it? So we're going to go into and talk a little bit about these 5 trends in program design. And while all of those things are true, we want to innovate our programs, but we know there are some real challenges and obstacles to getting to it. We really want you to have a frame of mind looking for that low-hanging fruit, that 1 or 2 ideas that could help innovate some of your leadership programs to get better results. And so while sometimes trends presentations that I sit in on can be a little overwhelming, you're like, wow, that's so futuristic, or gosh, that would take a lot of time to figure out or to do. It's sort of, if you can put on sort of the mental hat of finding some quick and easy wins in your program, I think that could be a good start, right? It's about continuous improvement and continuing to make those necessary changes. So I wanted to pause just before I go into the trends, because we've had a question pop up. And the question is the need for innovation needed because leadership is not developing as much as desired or needed? It's a great question. I would say, so from an outcomes perspective, most organizations are still facing a lack of bench strength, a lack of internal people ready to be promoted into successively higher roles. Sometimes retention of leaders can be an issue in certain areas. So from the business's perspective, because some of those gaps exist in what's being measured, the perception is, well, then we're not developing them as much as we should be, right? And so if we're investing and we have these programs in place and they're not getting necessarily the readiness level, the skill level that we're looking for, I think the business is asking, well, should those learning techniques and approaches be evolved and changed? And so I think that's sort of the impetus behind why the call for innovation is happening now more than ever. So as we turn to kind of discussing the types of program design changes and trends we should be considering, we wanted to also know we've not picked all of them. We've really just focused in on what we're seeing in terms of what's working, what's driving better outcomes in some of the leadership development programs within our clients that we get to be a part of. And so I wanted to also tell you a little bit later in the webinar, we're going to turn these trends into a quick assessment tool that you're going to be able to use to evaluate whether some of these elements are really present in your existing programs. And again, I think that's going to help you get momentum and find some of those quick wins and early ideas. So Lauren is going to take things away with our first trend.
I'm excited. So I also want to say really quickly, because that's a really good point. Thanks for that question, by the way, and we are going to allot a few minutes at the end, but if you guys have questions and you want to put them in, feel free to type them in, hit send, and we will either get to them as we can, or we'll have a few minutes at the end. And we're also going to be sending out that awesome assessment tool within 24 hours after the webinar, along with the slides and the recording. So let's talk trends. So Krista, you just underscored the need for increased innovation. And the first trend we're seeing is that learner needs, they're really shifting. Their needs and their preferences are shifting along with their attitudes about what works and what kind of training they want to receive. You already mentioned how the Leadership Development Report underscores the need for transformation and innovation, and our first trend encourages us to focus in on the leader's needs and preferences, right? So what it comes down to is that leaders prefer to be in the driver's seat when it comes to their learning, rather than attending maybe a one-size-fits-all program designed according to the priorities of the learning and development function. But I think it's worth mentioning that we should also underscore that training can't only be in the learner's seat, right? For example, sometimes younger or perhaps earlier career managers think that completing a training means they're proficient. You know, I learned that, I'm an expert. While more tenured career professionals might think that since they've been managing for a long time, that they're already proficient in these skills. So really the thought here in this trend is that learning and development providers need to transform the way they provide training to be more creative, to give more choice, more personalization, because it's possible they haven't met the pace of the changing expectations of the learner's needs, and that demands a more personal experience, that training should be relevant to their role. And, you know, we're not only seeing this across the board, we're really seeing this come up in some generational preferences as well. So I think we all know by now that millennial leaders, they're the people leaders of today. They're already in positions of management and leadership. At this point, they represent the majority of the workforce and about half the total people manager population today. And what we're seeing here is that millennials' views differ from those of their more tenured colleagues on what they expect from leaders and from leadership development. They're literally becoming more critical of and questioning the effectiveness of the programs that they're being offered. So for example, the millennials who answered this Harvard study were showing questioned the relevancy of their organization's leadership development programs far more than their more tenured colleagues did. Only about 50% said that they see strong alignment between program content and the business issues facing their organizations. But by contrast, as much as 75% of the more, let's call them boomers, their boomer age, they saw much more alignment. So that really underscores the changing attitudes of learners and the shift toward wanting more relevance. So let's take a look at our next trend.
Great. So the second trend we wanted to focus in on is measurement, right? And I think oftentimes when we think of measurement, we think that that's synonymous with like the metrics that we may be using to gauge program success. What we wanted to highlight here is really the importance of clarity of purpose in measurement as well. So we know there are so many quotes about measurement that we've all seen and heard over the years, and the importance of being clear on purpose. I think we all understand that. Defining the measures that matter most and what gets measured gets done, and so on. Even the old Stephen Covey quote about beginning with the end in mind, right? Knowing kind of what we're setting out to achieve. It's really for us when we're working with clients around the purpose of their leadership programs, it's asking this question, which is very loaded, but it's important. It's what is the investment in this program solving for, right? How do I then collect data and tell the story that justifies the investment at the close of the program? Right? And so the idea here is that you have these links in a chain, and all of which are important. So if we're not clear about the problem we're trying to solve, or we don't collect data, or we don't tell that story back to the business to justify the return, all of these from a measurement perspective are critical, and we've got to make sure that we don't miss any links in the chain. And one of those missing links that we see probably more often than not, it's just a lack of clarity of program purpose. And so while the measurement aspect and collecting data is important, we have to ask ourselves, is that the right data to collect? Does it connect to the problem we were trying to solve, or the business impact, to the question earlier, that we're trying to improve upon? And so, some leadership programs really do start out with a very strong and clear purpose. We've seen others that maybe don't have a clear purpose at all. We just wanted to do some development, and we didn't necessarily know exactly why we were doing that or what we wanted to improve. And then we also see times where some of your signature programs, leadership programs, have probably been in place for a long time as well. So while they may have started out at the beginning with a clear purpose, as time goes on, things change, that purpose becomes weak. And so since we know what we measure matters and that we want to measure what matters most, I wanted to just give you an example of how purpose plays out in terms of what the focus of metrics actually is, and through the tale of 3 high potential programs that we've worked on, and all came about for very different reasons. So the purpose of the program really helped set the stage for then what we wanted to measure and collect, and what then we wanted to report back on in terms of telling the story to the business. And so the first that you'll see here is that this particular organization had that lack of bench strength, right? So as new positions in higher ranks in the organization became available, they were having to hire almost exclusively from the outside. There weren't internal candidates ready for promotions. Also, because of some reductions over time, attrition, and so on, there were a number of positions in the higher ranks that were becoming available and not enough internal people ready to fill them. They also were seeing in the middle manager ranks employee engagement issues, scores that they wanted to improve, and so their program focused in on a group of high potential leaders that they were grooming for future succession. And so 2 of the metrics that became really important for them to be able to tell the story to the business about the impact of this leadership program were promotions, so the number of program participants promoted over time, as well as improvement in employee engagement scores, which they were able to get down to the individual manager level, so they could see the degree to which this leadership program was able to influence positively employee engagement scores for program participants versus non-program participants. The second example is slightly different. This is a global organization that was having very high turnover, a very flat organization, so not a lot of upward mobility options. And their corporate headquarters was in a pretty rural area, so they were sort of geographically impaired in being able to recruit talent and keep talent over the long term. And so the purpose behind their program and the problem they were trying to solve, very different than the first example. So the metrics that became really critical were retaining high potential leaders. So that was something that that they were able to report back and track these participants over time. It also influenced program design in a lot of ways as well, because the program itself was trying to provide more lattice opportunities, so opportunities to grow and expand skills in different areas of the business versus traditional ladder or hierarchical promotional opportunities. So, so again, different purpose drove different metrics. The third program was really a situation where they felt like many of their high potential, mostly senior director level positions, they didn't necessarily see the performance out of them that they were looking for, and didn't see them demonstrating leadership skills as frequently as they would want them to. And so it became important from a measurement standpoint for this organization to look at goal achievement. So we were able to isolate, program participants versus non-program participants and see if this high potential program would ultimately have a greater degree of goal achievement than their non-participant colleagues. And then because leadership skill demonstration was important, they also did pre and post assessment. So 12 months later, taking a reassessment of that 360-degree feedback to see if the people up, down, and around that leader were noticing their demonstration of leadership skills more thoroughly. So 3 very different programs, right? 3 very different metrics and 3 very different stories that were told back to the business about why that investment was important and what it impacted. So in looking at sort of the common measurements, we thought it might be helpful for you to see the top 4 measures that are used in some of the better-in-class programs. And so you can see those 4 here. Most commonly, of course, organizations are using the participant experience, or the UX of leaders going through programs. What's the impact that they have seen? About half the companies are doing behavior change assessments, many people tracking pipeline retention. But I think the most sort of stunning part of the data is that while it's hit or miss relative to what folks are measuring, about 40% of L&D practitioners feel that they, only about 40% feel that they capture program effectiveness and are in a position to talk about the impact. And so it's a bit of a rabbit hole, as we say here. FlashPoint measurement can be really challenging. How far do you go? How much time and effort should you spend measuring a program? And really, I mean, from our perspective, we're just trying to answer the question, what does success look like? If we're trying to solve for high turnover in certain executive positions or senior director positions, then let's report and track that. Just because we can measure it doesn't mean that it's a measure that matters, right? Either to L&D or to the business. So each client's measurement plan, in terms of the ones that we work on, they come out a bit differently based on the level of leader that they may be focused on, the length of the program, the amount of the time investment, and so on. So I think the point from my perspective is that we want to be better than sort of that 60% of people who aren't capturing program effectiveness, right? But we also don't want to measure everything. And so I think it's about picking and choosing what's relevant, and coming back and centering on your purpose is a great start.
And that's me. I love I love what you just mentioned about, what does success look like, individually for different organizations, right? I think that focusing on the purpose of measurement, not just the numbers, it really opens the door to our next trend, that is that learning and development is getting much more personal. The demand is there to make it more personal and include more choice. So what we're really seeing in the field is that our clients are looking for better ways to balance traditional classroom activities with other on-demand resources, for example, that enable leaders to personalize their experience, make it more experiential, as well as address the unique needs of leaders at different levels. So, Krista, I know some of the aspects of the personal and technical that we've added to our programs recently is the use of chatbots, for example, to increase just-in-time coaching conversations, working with spreading the learning out over time, as well as mixing up the group and individual components of the programs. To make the learning more personal, more nuanced, we're asking our clients to think about opportunities that exist both inside and outside of their organizations, such as community service activities, board leadership. These can be incredible developmental tools. And I'm thinking also of a recent blog on gamification that we wrote, that gamification is a medium for delivering content that makes leaders want to engage and learn. And I think the critical takeaway here is ensuring that you're thinking about multifaceted ways that we're leveraging more than just formal methods of development in the portfolio of options that we offer or that folks offer their leaders. So let's take a look at a little bit more of a deep dive. Let's think about some ways that you can bring some choice into your programs. We like to call this choose your own adventure. I just love that. So choose your own adventure is where a leader can be active in selecting some activities that work best for their learning style, their pace, their interests, their goals, and so on. So for example, one client we designed an 18-month program for in this choose your own adventure style, put them really in the driver's seat. They were able to choose their own development adventure, which means that each leader had access to leadership and management skill development targeted specifically to meet his or her needs. So in this example you see here, in the range of about 4 to 6 hours a week commitment, but spread out over 18 months, this client's leaders had access to not only a comprehensive program, but an internal support team, coaches, their fellow participants, as well as an external support team to keep the program on track and help with mentoring, and of course, direct access to their manager. And over the time allotted, they could create a personalized learning path that could include, for example, half-day in-person sessions, informal lunch and learn, senior leader presentations, the whole gambit, even just-in-time learning through push notifications on their phone. And the way this was presented at the outset was in the form of an adventure journal. So this would be a comprehensive resource that the participants could use to track all of the program details, provide space for reflection, notes, add next steps, bring it to their manager, talk to them about their goals. What I love about this program example is just that journal and how it creates that really personalized roadmap that's almost like a compass to keep their learners on track. And, we've been talking about this all along, but not every learner is the same, right? So let's see how that sets the stage for our next trend. So we just talked about how important it is to enable leaders to find development opportunities that meet their personalized interests while benefiting their success in the job. And a great way to help them along that path is mentoring and coaching. So I'm thinking here that mentoring and coaching is not exactly brand new, right? So why are we seeing this as a trend? Like, why mentoring? Why now? The clear picture is that mentoring and coaching, they're effective. Study after study shows this. So what you're seeing here is that, yes, classroom-led, instructor-led learning is effective, but it's actually not quite as effective as coaching and mentoring. But you can see by the larger circle that it's put to use far more often. In this particular study from Brandon Hall, coaching and mentoring is actually used 37% less than classroom learning, but is actually rated higher in effectiveness. And drawing back to what we've learned already over the previous trends, coaching, mentoring, it's a personal methodology. It's personalized. It's about the learner's adventure. So of course, I think it goes without saying that we're not saying just dump the classroom and only coach and mentor, but it's a great access point. Recognize that it can have a lot of areas for development that maybe a 2-day retreat or workshop just can't quite cover. So let's take a little bit of deeper dive into how, for example, mentoring might work. So mentoring is probably one of the most versatile and varied ways to increase leadership knowledge, increase a leader's knowledge. It helps broaden knowledge across the business, deepen the understanding of the business function, and engages an employee within and helps them understand organizational values and culture better. So again, why is this a trend? Why now? Because, for example, just last week, we looked at a DDI global leadership forecast that just came out, and it showed that organizations with a formal mentoring culture had a 46% higher leader quality and actually a 20% higher retention rate. But only about 1/3 of the organizations surveyed actually had a formal mentoring culture or plan in place. So when you're thinking about implementing that in our client organizations, we see some very specific ways in which it can be implemented that you see here. It could be developing future successors in a specific role, transferring knowledge, developing first-time leaders, and so on. And also, I think we should circle back too and take a look at how this is playing out generationally. So bottom line, mentoring increases retention. It also aligns with the ways we've seen how our millennial leaders want to be developed. They expect development via experiences, opportunities, mentoring, and stretch assignments, for example. Let's consider for a moment that the average tenure of a millennial is only about 2 years in organizations. But a key factor that millennials report who intend to stay with an organization for more than 5 years is whether they have a mentor. So In fact, those intending to stay more than 5 years are twice as likely to have a mentor than those not intending to stay. So we're seeing this as a resurgence of both company-wide, or we're seeing in our clients that mentoring is coming online. We're seeing a resurgence of both company-wide mentoring programs along with targeted mentoring programs that are meant to assist a cohort of leaders to work with high potentials, for example. In addition, we're seeing an increase in the use and impact of coaching. So over the last decade, coaching has really shifted in its understanding from, it's not an emphasis on behavioral issues, right? It's really moving toward developing leaders, and it's being understood to do that better. In the last 5 years or so in particular, coaching is increasingly positioned as a powerful, future-focused development approach for leaders at all levels. Do you mind if I ask if you guys can hear me and switch the slide? We might have lost you. Yay! Thank you.
Yay! There we are. Hey, Lauren. While we're pausing, we're just getting a couple of questions on this previous slide.
Awesome.
Around chicken or egg, RE mentoring, and 5+ years. Sort of like what came first, or what caused one or the other. And a question on relating the percentages. I don't quite know exactly what that means, but maybe just we could spend just a moment here. Yeah, you know, this is a question that we have asked ourselves as well. You know, is people willing to stay 5 or more plus years? Are they just more likely to be interested in mentoring, right? Or is the mentor having a mentor driving the longevity and tenure? I think it's a little difficult to know. I would call these a correlation versus a causal link, just in terms of this particular research. You know, I think at the end of the day, we could probably all agree that mentoring could indeed help connect or make more sticky a person to the organization, because they're getting, that millennial leader is getting a broader perspective on the business. They're learning more cross-functionally, which may make them more likely, more likely to stay. That's kind of how we've been thinking about it. But I wouldn't necessarily say we would want to go as far as, if we get a mentor for every millennial, they're going to be twice as likely to stay, right? So I think it's kind of, more of this, kind of grain of salt with that. But, to the extent that, what makes sense to me about that is the extent that it helps millennial leaders get more embedded in the organization, which may indeed lead, at least one of the causes that may lead them to stay for longer. Yeah, I think that's good. So we'll just you can keep moving along here. I just wanted to pause us while we had a couple of questions on that.
I love it. So thank you. So we're taking just a quick peek here at coaching, and just the idea here is that over the last decade, it's shifted and it's becoming just more common organizationally, and it's really honing in on its focus as the purpose being to develop leaders. So in particular, it's becoming increasingly positioned as a powerful, future-focused development approach for leaders at all levels. So here in this slide, we culled some research from the experts at the conference board, and they report that the most common uses of coaching are identifying gaps, blind spots, building self-awareness, strengthening critical leadership skills, and so on, as you can see here. But I think coaching is so on trend because it really is going to directly impact the want for personalized learning, right? It's customizable to the situation. It gives leaders an opportunity to practice and build that muscle memory, so leaders are better able to handle the unknown or unplanned and work in, kind of work out what happens when they're confronted with a dynamic or changing situation. And then plus, by having leaders who have a coach, they're seeing firsthand the value of strong coaching skills, and they're more likely to want to leverage that, become a coach themselves, perhaps not become a formal coach, but they're more likely to leverage a coach approach with their teams. So just to kind of wrap that up a bit, I'd just like to, just as we talked quickly about how mentoring can be leveraged, coaching can obviously be leveraged in a variety of ways. So I used to think like, oh, coaching is like that one-on-one sports analogy, right? Nope. Yeah, one-on-one is perfect, but you can also do it with groups, teams, or for action learning, coaching skill development for a manager who wants to coach their teams, like I just mentioned. But they might not really have the desire to go to school to become a coach, but just they want to be that manager as coach. They, maybe they're what we call a super user. They love coaching, so they want to bring that impact to their teams. So I think that by emphasizing coaching as a modality, we should also note how it can help sustain the learning, which I think is actually going to be what you're going to talk about next, Krista.
Great, and we're going to move in now to our fifth and final trend on sustaining the learning and through reinforcement programs. And we've been talking about the importance of reinforcement, for decades now. And from our perspective, it's become a must-have versus the nice-to-have maybe it was, 15 years ago. And, this also includes how technology has enabled us to reach learners in different ways than we've ever been able to before. So in terms of a reinforcement program, just as much time and attention needs to be given to the design of the reinforcement program itself as to the program overall. And so what we wanted, just to sort of bring to life here is the sort of all too familiar frustration of leaders who fail to apply or practice new skills once they get back into their day-to-day environments. And really combating this challenge, a lot of our clients have been working to add various reinforcement components to their leadership programs. So they're thinking more in experiences than events, right? And working to sort of adapt their existing programs to kind of align with that mindset. So your training reinforcement program, many of you know the 70-20-10 from our general, sort of learning model, but the 15-25-60 is what we like to think about in terms of how balanced your reinforcement program really should be. So 15% of the training reinforcement should really focus on the awareness stage. So this is really sort of helping leaders understand why achieving behavior change is important, right? So kind of that call to action, that important why question being answered. About 25% of training reinforcement programs should focus on knowledge retention. And it's important to note that reinforcement programs aren't reminders of what they already got, right? This is about focusing them more on retaining that, taking it to the next step. And what retention really focuses on here is how they can master that new knowledge or skill that they've gained in the leadership program that you've designed, right? And so the 60% that remains is really the core of any reinforcement program, and that's really focused on the what and the when to apply it. And so as you think about, that's sort of a general guideline. I mean, there are some differences in terms of how programs show up based on how long they are and so on. But just to sort of jump into this just a little bit more, wanted to talk about some of the components that should be present in any strong reinforcement program. And like I said, the same clarity of purpose needs to be present here as in the design of the program as a whole, and sort of what we talked about back in the measurement trend. And so being careful that we're not just retraining, but that we're really moving toward helping reinforce learning by teaching that why, that what, that when, and how in our programs. And so we also want it to be balanced in terms of the methods as well. So if we're sending out through any reinforcement program follow-up bite-sized pieces of learning and application, we want them We want them to be balanced in terms of the types of and methods. So, downloads, worksheets, links, resources, questions that really prompt them to think about how they're applying, or even sharing with others, how they're applying the skills learned. Reference materials, inspirational videos, things that are going to drive them to make that behavior change back in their own environment. And then you also want to consider things like the length of that reinforcement program, the interval, meaning how often are you reaching out, and technology, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. So let's just take an example. So if you have a year-long high potential program like we were talking about earlier, reinforcement doesn't have to start at the close of that 12-month period. It may actually start before that, where you're even interimly through pushing out various content and ideas and questions and so on, things that are going to help apply and retain what you've already began to develop in them through the program. And then that could and should continue on after the program, so again, that they're reminded of the importance of why, but also we're continuing to give them ideas on how to apply, when to apply, and so on. So all of these things sort of come together to help the leader, sort of get to that place of application and behavior change that we want to see. Now, technology is the key in many organizations. It's what's available to us now versus what was available to us 10 years ago is remarkable, and there's so many applications that can help you with these kinds of programs. Pardon me. It can be simple. So when I talk about a reinforcement program, it could be something as simple as follow-up reinforcement webinars that participants come together and participate in, that really drive application and engage them in conversation around what's working and what's not. Group coaching as a follow-on is another example of that. Even things like leveraging platforms like GoToMeeting or Adobe Connect or Skype or other ways for learners post-learning event, to kind of continue that experience. We've also used more developed applications like MindMarker and Mobile Coach, and in these kinds of applications, there's tracking software that can help you to gather analytics, any questions that you want to ask participants in terms of how they're doing, what they're applying, an example of an impact they've had on their team. It enables you to draw out and collect data on the impact of the program too. So there's a connection back to measurement as well, that can help you collect data throughout the life of both the program itself as well as the reinforcement program to follow. So, we've captured 5 of our top trends, but we wanted just to leave you with with some practical application here. And our final objective was really centered on helping you think about shaping your agenda for 2019 and beyond. So to help you analyze where your current program design opportunities are, we've built a short assessment. And so we're going to be sending this tool after the webinar, as Lauren mentioned, to give you kind of a sense for how you could start maybe finding some of those wins that I talked about at the beginning. But I wanted to give you a quick preview of this to explain it a little bit so you know how to use it. And it really has 3 parts. So there's a section on evaluating or assessing the program definition of your leadership program, the implementation phase, so some components in there, as well as then the sustainability of your program and how well are you doing in that bucket of components and activities. And so while I go through these in a little bit more detail, we wanted just to get you thinking about envisioning just one of your leadership programs, whether that's a high potential, an executive development program, an emerging leader program, whatever that is. Sort of get that in your mind's eye as I start covering some of the items. And I think you're going to very quickly see how through doing the assessment even, you can start to incorporate some of these trends into your programs over time. So let's start with the definition stage. So, here what we would want to see is that a leadership program, that it's customized to the unique needs. We talked earlier about the importance of leaders feeling that our leadership programs are relevant to the business issues and challenges they face, right? And so we want the business to see this positive perception that the skills, the content, the learning techniques are all relevant to their situation and their needs. And that requires us to be purposeful and to, as we mentioned in the measurement trend, to really get clear on why this program exists and what we're trying to move the needle on. That can really help bring clarity. And then that drives some of the specific qualitative or quantitative data and information you're going to capture and collect around that program in terms of how it's measured. And so you'll, in this assessment tool, kind of rate yourself low to high, 1 to 5, 1 being low, and sort of think about, okay, well, do I have a clear purpose for this program? Would the business say that, and the leaders that are going through the program say this is really relevant to the issues and challenges they're facing? So there'll also be a section on implementation. So this is all about sort of the phase in terms of when I'm actually, after program definition, when I'm actually executing the program itself. It's first about selecting participants and do we have the right, are we selecting the right people, right, for the program? We've sometimes seen programs where we think the content and the offering is on point for what the business needs, but participant selection was weak, and so not the right people were in the right program for where they are or what their needs were or the roles or functions they're in. So I think that's an important part for you to analyze as well. And then, are there ways inside of your program that bring the leader more self-awareness to drive that behavior change? Things like 360s or other things that really hold up the mirror and give meaning to the leader in terms of what's working well for them, where are their opportunities or blind spots. And then, is there an opportunity, and are you giving opportunities for leaders to have some choice in the programs that you have? Again, being a little bit more leader-driven. And then, are you bringing all of these different modalities that we've talked about to life? Are we incorporating coaching in any form, mentoring in any form, the more experiential components that we talked about earlier? I mean, even things like inside experts, outside experts, getting people involved in activities outside of the organization in terms of service projects and other things are ways that programs can be a bit more multimodal. And then the third section will ask you a little bit about sustainability. So this goes to reinforcement, which was our last trend that we just talked about, which is about, what are the ways in which you're sustaining that leadership journey over time. And we also really feel strongly and have had great experiences with getting a 360 support system in place for the leader. So involving the one-up, having senior leader sponsorship, panels of senior leaders engaged in various programs, encouraging that peer-to-peer learning and creating accountability partners and other things that help connect leaders to each other, connect them to their manager, connect them to their direct reports, and connect them to the sort of executive vision and direction for the organization. And then ultimately, programs are sustainable when they continue to stay connected to the strategy and direction and connect back to sort of the values and vision of the organization as well. So I want to make sure our programs are integrated well. And then are you or do you have ways to track, measure, analyze what's working, what's not working, and are you making sort of those year-over-year improvements? Those 4 components really connect back to how sustainable that program is. So what can we do now to innovate? We just wanted to leave you really with 2 thoughts here. Current and future leaders in your organization particularly millennial leaders, are really in a prime position, we think, to help us shape some of these new learning techniques and approaches to how we design and deliver our programs. And I think savvy L&D teams are going to be able to tap into leaders' energy and creativity and get them helping us to devise that top-notch programs that really resonate with the leaders that we're working to develop. And one question we might ask ourselves is, could you form a design team that could pick out and choose one program that they could assess, analyze, and then innovate in the future? It could be in small ways, it could be in big ways. And then second, even if you don't leverage the full assessment tool, but certainly, we would encourage you to, you could do that on your own for each of your programs, compare and contrast. Some of your programs may rank higher in sustainability and some in program definition, but you'll, I think, quickly see where your low-hanging fruit is. But even if not, what's one idea from today that you could implement right away as you think about the next cohort that's coming up for one of your signature flagship leadership programs? What's one thing that you could do to sort of keep moving the needle and keep that continuous improvement going? So in closing, I guess I would just say that we really think L&D practitioners who can start innovating and keep doing so are going to be in the best positions to meet the sort of ever-shifting needs that their organizations are facing. So innovative programs for leaders, we think, is really what will set the stage for leadership development and build the capabilities so that that gap isn't there anymore that we talked about in the beginning, that we're getting the outcomes for the business. We have ready leaders now with the skills that they need. And that ultimately, that's going to help us be more proactive and adaptive in the face of change and help create and inspire an organization that will thrive in this new landscape. And so those are sort of our parting thoughts on, what we think you could do now, and then hopefully you'll be able to leverage this tool more deeply to dig in and learn more about where your opportunity areas are.
And there we go. So we've got a couple more minutes. We could absolutely take a couple questions if we have a few. If you'd like to pop one into the question and send it on, we'd be happy to take a quick look at that. I think we did have one that came in on gamification, if we had any formal stats on that. I'd be happy to follow up with you on, we actually talked about that in one of our blogs recently, and we had a good example within that blog for leveraging gamifications through a certain company, kind of a case study. So I'd be happy to pass that on. And then any other questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. Krista, did you have any on your end?
Yeah, it looks like we have one on an individual working in the educational leadership development, and that they're noting their weakness is around the reinforcement aspect in all of the trends, and so would love to hear an example of an effective reinforcement practice. Yeah, so I'll give you one very specific example, one on the easy to implement and one on the little bit more difficult side to implement. So in a 6-month emerging leader program that we've worked with, the participant goes through a DISC assessment. They then move into some classroom events over that 6 months, spread out over that 6-month period of time. And then they have an opportunity to do a project in the organization where they work with their cohort and present that project resolution or solution back to the business. And so that program was working really well, but after that 6 months, it was sort of that question of like, how do I sustain this, or how do I keep this going and keep contributing to the business? And they implemented something pretty simple, but they broke the group into small 6-person subgroups and provided regular coaching calls for 6 more months following the program, once a month. So it provided those opportunities for those leaders to have some peer-to-peer learning where they're connecting with each other about what's working, what's not working, how have you applied what we learned, etc. But they also had the benefit of working with a coach who could ask great, powerful questions to draw that out of them. On the other end of the spectrum, we have another organization who used MindMarker as an application. And they had a year-long leadership development program with a 360, a 2-day learning event in the middle, some one-on-one coaching, but then they used this technology application and created a 6-month follow-on reinforcement program that sent bite-sized learning, reinforcement, how to apply, ideas about how to apply those leadership concepts in their environment on a bi-weekly basis out to leaders through this mobile application. So it was coming to them right on their device, you know, asking them insightful questions, getting them to answer questions about how they were applying, sending video, a worksheet on how they could do a particular exercise with their team to take something a little bit further. So they can be like completely low cost or and low ease to implement, as well as, you know, more on the sophisticated end where you're using technology. Let's see, we've got first question, another question here. Do any programs offer pay increases for successful completion? You know, we don't necessarily, I honestly can't think of one example where the pay increase was connected to the program. We've had things like a little bit less than that where there are gift cards or swag or you know, prestige kinds of honors, sort of more recognition, I would call them, versus pay increases. The only thing that I can think of in correlating would be in high potential programs when someone's promoted after successful completion of a program. Obviously, there's a link to a pay increase there, but no, I don't really see that very often. I'd have to think more. I could certainly take it offline if you want to talk about it more, but I'd have to think about whether that's a good idea, what would be maybe some of the pros and cons there. Let's see, my real challenge, another question here, Lauren. My real challenge is to gauge the level the content needs to be in order to be effective for a leadership team, the level of content. Yeah, so, and I'm assuming we mean from like basic concepts up to, you know, more senior level concepts. One quick idea for you is many of the programs that we've been involved in, just to sort of gut check on is this the right level, are beginning with concepts around leading self, so making sure there's like that awareness level, then moving out and focusing some of the content on leading others, and then moving out from there to more sophisticated concepts around leading the business, which are, you know, sort of higher order skills and generally a little bit more difficult to achieve. We also have some organizations that do needs assessments as well, right? So trying to understand proficiency level as it stands today, how relevant are a set of competencies or skills to those individuals' jobs, and then sort of customizing your offering in terms of content or topic areas based on that. Okay, so continuing on, we have so many questions this time. This is great.
I know.
So if you don't have a leadership development program in place, where's a good place to start? Great question. So I would go with that first phase of the assessment that I talked about, which would give you a good resource to begin. And I'd say I'd go to purpose, like what's going on in the business, where are some of the pain points, what do business leaders, your EE team, you know, senior leadership team, where do they think some of the gaps are? Get some input, talk with others, you know, form a design team to get people talking about what would be needed if we did a leadership program. I'd start researching too as well. There's so much great information out there on leadership development programs and different things people are doing. And then encourage you to talk with maybe some colleagues or peers in the field at other companies, which could give you a good place to start as well. But program definition would be where I would start for sure before you get to content.
Very good.
Oh my goodness, so there's so many questions, Lauren. It's
so many questions. So
we still have a few more which we can take offline and answer, right?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to honor our commitment, and thank you so much for the questions. As you exit out of the webinar today, please take a moment to take that quick survey. If you have another question, add it in there. Just kind of give us a little feedback, and then let's go ahead and push the slide one more time. I just want to draw your attention to our upcoming programs and events. We have the Leadership Challenge workshop and facilitator training in 3 different cities this year. It's going to be awesome. Oops, there's a little boo-boo on there. That's all 2009, folks. So we're definitely, we'd love to have you join us for one of these amazing workshops, and those are going to be found on our website at flashpointleadership.com/events. You can connect with us at any time via the info@flashpointleadership.com. And with that, I'd love to thank everyone for joining us today. This was an awesome webinar, and we'll definitely circle back on some of those questions and send out that lovely assessment tool, as well as the slides and recording within 24 hours. So thanks, Krista. This was so much fun.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren.
You bet. Take care.